Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man? They say murder three. Strange things that happen here. How stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree?
Coffee. Without it, we would never have had the Industrial Revolution. We'd all be still living in Europe in mud huts. Here in Laredo, we have the Organic Man Coffee Trike. 4501 McPherson, the best coffee on the planet. If you can't get to Laredo, you can order from the Organic Man Coffee Trike .shop. Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Chris James. Or I should say, Showtime. I will now pick up right where I left off sometime, was it last week? Chapter 3, The Bag Office. The front yard looked much better since the Civil War soldiers had taken it upon themselves to chop down all the weeds and plant some much nicer things like corn and carrots. There were rows of corn growing between the slots where the cars were parked. Carrots and peas had been planted along the walk leading up to the front door. It turned out most of the soldiers had grown up on farms and they knew how to till the soil and make things grow. Pam wondered if she was the only one that could see the fruits of their labor. As she pulled in and parked, spotting Lieutenant Brambleberry pulling weeds from around the broken-down cement truck parked next to the front window of the basement. "Lieutenant, how is everything going for you today?" The lieutenant looked at Pam and gave her his most gallant bow. His hat touched the ground at his feet. "Dear kind madam, you are radiant as always." Pam looked down at her gym uniform and wondered just how bad his vision must be. The rest of the boys were busy hauling dirt around in a wheelbarrow they had borrowed from the contractors working in the basement, turning the underground of the mansion into much-needed office space and storage. Pam ran up the steps of the porch and set her cell phone down on the shelf by the door before venturing in to see how bad things had gotten. For those of you who have not read the previous 3 books, The Office has unkind effects on any electronic device passing through the front door. Hildy sat at her desk. She actually was sitting with her feet on the floor for a change, and she had a notebook out making entries as to the Bagstaff's activities. As she looked at Pam and kind of smiled. "Welcome to the Bag Company. How might we help you?" It took Pam a second to realize that Hildy didn't recognize her. "It's me, Pam." "Pam Bogus? I just came by to see how things were going." "Good Lord, what did you do to your hair?" Hildy was known for speaking without thinking. "Long story. Anything new around here?" "Yeah, there's weird sounds coming from the attic. I reported it to Cassandra, but she said it was just ghosts, so I shouldn't worry about it." Hildy continued to stare at Pam as if she just might burst into flames. "Really?" Pam was overjoyed. Music in the attic must mean that Sharma and Dan were back from Jefferson. Being a couple of ghosts, they had gone on every ghost tour offered. Pam took off running up the stairs to see her friends. The staircase was a bit odd in this building. The first floor ceiling was 20 feet high, making the staircase more like 2 stories. The office was a 3-story building with a huge attic and a bigger basement. The basement was 10 times as big as it should have been. Kind of confusing if you don't simply ignore it and go with what your eyes told you was a fact. Pam pounded up the second floor and ran into Mrs. Clark. She was there with her son Garrett, who was a wizard with the Zener cards. Pamela, you look so different. A long story. How's everything? Well, it looks as if the science guys are done now. You finished with the experiment? No, but I'm finished with the scientists. She pointed back into the room. The three scientists were in the process of beating the heck out of each other. Pam considered trying to break it up, but then maybe they'd learned their lesson this time. You'll still be coming by to see us, won't you? Pam considered the pair more of a part of the family than just employees. Oh, yes, that nice young lady. Mrs. Clark held one hand way up in the air to show who she was referring to. Said she could do much better working with Garrett than those clowns ever would. Hortense was a scryer, as well as able to read cards. Pam hadn't known she might want to work with the Zener cards as well. They exchanged pleasantries, and then Pam was back to running, heading up to the attic. Once she made it to the top of the ladder, stair leading to the attic, she was out of breath but excited to see her old friends. She knocked on the door. Dan and Sharma were both surprised by Pam's new look, but they quickly got over it. They spent a lot of time showing Pam all the ghost things they had brought back while visiting Jefferson on their honeymoon. Then Pam had to ask, "You saw the new receptionist, and you know Hilda, the energy healer? Do you guys think they just might be the same person?" Sharma and Dan looked at each other and then back at Pam. "You think she might be kind of off upstairs, like Susie was?" Dan asked. Sharma put in, "So what do you need us to do?" "If you could, just have a look and tell me they're either the same person or not." Pam hoped to end this question soon. Pam filled them in on all the things that had happened in the last 2 weeks. They told Pam all about staying at a haunted bed and breakfast in Jefferson. They'd spent the week at the Pride House, which had burnt down back in August of 2013. Being ghosts, this was no big deal. Sharma invited Pam to stay for dinner, but Pam felt she should try to get home once or twice before nightfall. Paula had some hard-fast rules about being there for dinner, and so far Pam had violated the rules just about every night this summer. Pam was en route to the exit and her pickup to head home when she was shanghaied by Kalinda Jefferson, the ghost teacher. Kalinda was a new hire brought into the bag with the hopes of teaching ghosts how to use modern technology. Unfortunately, modern technology didn't work inside the bag office. Any kind of electronic device brought through the front door was destined to overwhelming corruption, leading to either the garbage bin or Eddie's repair bench. Kept miles away from the office, of course. Kalinda had an office on the second floor, room 2E, where she was trying to teach modern tech using a flip chart and a blackboard. Old school meets high tech. It was working as well as it sounds. Pam, I was wondering if just maybe this was a bad idea. She looked down as if just learning there was no such thing as an honest politician. Pam was one of those people who took anyone's problems and made them her own, and then drove herself to irresponsibility trying to solve them. This was just who she was. Pam ran the problem around in her head. She tried thinking of a possible solution, followed by an improbable solution. "Come with me. I have an idea." Pam hoped it was a good idea and not something she would need to pay money to fix or wind up in the hospital over. Pam led Kalinda down the stairs and back to the kitchen. Carol Munchausen was working on a horse with a Napoleon complex. Carol worked in the kitchen because it was the only room with a door to the outside. Horses just didn't work well going up and down the stairs. Carol was trying to convince the horse there was just no way he could be the Emperor of Europe. The horse was having none of this. Here, see this? Carol held up a book showing a portrait of Napoleon Bonaparte. See, he has 2 legs and you have 4, as she was staring into the horse's eyes. The horse conveyed his doubts. That picture was painted by somebody with issues. Whoever that is, it's not me. He felt as if he'd made his case. Pam and Calinda just heard the sound of a horse normally makes when making noises. Carol, on the other hand, understood him. Pam just waved and hustled Calinda out the backyard. A flock of poultrygeist went running by, all clucking and raising dust. Pam yelled a quick hello and then tried to act as if she wasn't speaking to an imaginary flock of ghost chickens. The storage building occupied the back half of the yard. It had started out life as the corrals and a barn they used back in the days when you had horses or you walked. The horses were long gone, so the building was used to store anything valuable enough to protect from the bag building's mysterious effects on them. The company car was kept there as well, a 1980 Cadillac station wagon, better known as the hearse. Pam spotted Grandy Sear, the company maintenance man and all-around semi-handyman. Grandy had the ability to see dead people. Unfortunately, he only saw dead people laying around being dead in whichever location they had breathed their last. This led to him staying away from most public places and avoiding anything that might upset him. He did know the difference between a Phillips and a standard screwdriver. Grandy, I have a little project for you. Pam gave him her best smile. Does it involve installing an XM radio in your new used pickup? For some odd reason, Grandy was terrified of installing radios in anything. This is Calinda Jefferson. She needs a classroom out here so she can teach ghosts from the past how to use modern technology. Do I have to hook up any computers or projectors or TVs? Grandy wasn't good with electronics, but he did build an elevator for the prince. Nope, I just clean out the tack room so Calinda can set up in there. The tack room had been converted into the maid's quarters in the 40s, complete with a bathroom and a small kitchenette. In the 80s, the maid's quarters, which hadn't been used in a long time, became an apartment for use by anybody in need of a place to stay. When nobody wanted to stay in the barn, the apartment was converted into storage for old phone books. What do I do with all these phone books? Box them up and ship them off to the recycling center. We don't need 100 years worth of phone books. Pam wondered why they received 40 phone books each year when they only had one phone that actually worked. Pam left Calinda with Grandy, and she could show him what she wanted in the way of a classroom, and he could do the dirty work. After saying howdy and goodbye to everybody in the office, Pam set out for home. Wow, it's only 5:30, some kind of a world record. Chapter 4. The Evil Grows. Mindy approached a bunch of guys hanging out doing what teenage boys did when they had nothing else to do, and that is nothing. You want to go to a party? She almost sounded like she meant it. The guys all looked at each other. What, on a Monday? One asked, of nobody in particular. Yeah, it's a Monday night party. Mindy gave them an androgynous look. I have a bunch of things I've got to do, one said. He wasn't so much needing to do anything, but he did know that Mindy hung out with Ralph, and Ralph might object to his weaseling in on his date. How about you two? Are you scared? Ah, the magic word. Hey, I'm not scared of anything, the second of the bunch stated. Yeah, me also. If only he'd paid more attention in English class. Without any more words, Mindy turned and walked away, heading towards the street. The two not scared members of the invited followed quickly behind. The only one willing to cede his better judgment headed the other direction. Man, I wish I had more gumption and less things to do, he mumbled as his feet carried him away. Pam arrived back home to find the Haverstraws had found a nice big apartment to move into. They took their 6 kids and made a hole in the crowd formerly occupying the bogus home. Paula had decided it was easier to move Pam into the guest bedroom and leave the Bellums in Pam's room, so now Pam was a guest in her own house. Kind of. After living in a cave all week, this is kind of like a 5-star hotel. Pam would see about moving her things over from her room as soon as she had built up enough energy. The closet door was beginning to bulge with a tremendous pressure mounting as all of her things settled to the floor. Maybe it would be easier to just replace everything. Pam couldn't think of anything in her closet she would be willing to risk her life in order to rescue. Paula found Pam's school uniform. How did you burn your dress like this? She held it up and eyeballed Pam through several of the holes. Grease fire? She took in Paula's look. I threw water on it? And she tried to avoid the look of shock. I didn't know it would do that? Paula held up the shoe missing the toe. Same fire. Pam guessed she would have to go buy some new things soon and pay for them with her own money. Right after dinner, you should run over to the school store and pick up make that several new uniforms. You only have 2 right now. Pam tried to come up with better things to do, like watch TV or surf the internet, but she never could argue with her folks, especially her mom. Once dinner was history and the dishes had been washed, dried, and put away, which always made Pam wonder why they had a dishwasher if she was required to wash the dishes in the sink. It was time to replace her damaged wardrobe. Sarah wanted to come along, so Pam grabbed her purse and they went out to see about some less burned things. We only have 2 hours, so we'd best get moving. Sarah was impressed by the new used ride. Wow, your aunt gave you this pickup? Way cool. All my aunt ever gave me was a giant bunny costume for Christmas. Pam got behind the wheel. Well, there was a bit more to it than that, like the missing engine compartment in her former car. The school store was actually just a local department store that also sold school things. They parked near the front door, being sure to avoid the handicap parking so anyone else could use it, especially anybody driving a brand new car and lacking in morals or scruples. Pam considered getting a shopping cart, but noticed the only one by the door was missing 2 wheels. The left front and the right rear were both gone. Not wanting to go and search the parking lot, Pam opted to just carry her soon-to-be-purchased purchases in her arms. She grabbed a few of the official tartan colors for her school and for her grade. The white shirts were all about the same, and a new pair of loafers to replace the air-conditioned pair at home. The pair of shoes had to be handed to Sarah to carry because Pam's arms were now full. Lastly, she grabbed a new book bag. Paula had given her some cash to pay for the bag since she had said she was going to buy one. As they were standing in line waiting to pay, Pam saw a few of her classmates walking out the door with Ralph. He looked as if he'd slept in his clothes and not in a bed. They were saying things about some kind of a Monday night celebration. Sarah watched them go by. It must be nice to not have any homework. Who throws a party on a Monday night anyway? What are they celebrating 4 more days till the weekend? I have no idea. I never go to those kinds of gets-togethers. Pam's mom wouldn't allow any dating until she was married. Pam wasn't too sure how that would work out, but her mother wasn't to be argued with. Something about Ralph drew Pam's attention. After paying for the school things and buying Sarah a new art set, Pam felt drawn to do some investigation work. "Come on, I want to see something." The pair ran out to the pickup and headed in the same direction Pam had seen Ralph drive just a moment ago. She did her best to fly along the streets without breaking too many laws, working the shift lever up and down like a racing pro who hadn't been racing all that long. The red Ford Mustang was easy to spot, but Ralph wasn't bothering to obey as many laws as Pam felt necessary. As the edge of town was drawing close, the Mustang was drawing away. They drove out of town and kept going, looking for any sign of a car full of teenagers. Watch the side roads and let me know if you see their taillights. Mustang taillights are distinct and easy to recognize. Ralph's were even more so since one light had begun life as a dump truck light. Sarah turned sideways in her seat, her face inches from the side window. "Nope, nothing. I think they might have been abducted by aliens." "Oh, come on, aliens?" "Well, that's what happens in the shows you watch." Sarah had begun watching all the shows that Pam watched. This didn't bother her mom at all, since Sandy thought her younger sister might just be an alien instead of a human. They drove for another 30 minutes, checking any good-looking side roads as they went. Why do you want to know where they went? Sarah figured it was some kind of a teenage thing. "I don't really know. It just seems important." Pam couldn't even blame it on the voices in her head. They hadn't said a whole lot all day. "And not much to say as long as you're not trying to burn down the school." "Yeah, or get killed by headless bikers." I spoke too soon. Sarah just ignored any statements Pam made she wasn't involved in. She figured Pam was speaking to her ghost friends. Speaking of homework, Pam was supposed to read up on Italian shamanism? Or was that Italian shoemakers? She had some things to do. Pam arrived a half hour early for class. She parked across the street and was about to head over when Rumpus came flying by. He waved as he went past and then vanished in a cloud of burning rubber. "I'm glad to see someone's happy." She ran across the street and went straight to Mrs. Grampus's class. Walking in and taking a seat, she quickly realized she was the only one there. Now this felt odd. Pam had spent plenty of time alone in varying places, but never a school classroom. It kind of felt like being in detention. Pam had somehow managed to avoid ever being in detention. Her many crimes had all been just short of such a punishment, but she figured if she had been penalized in such a manner, this was how it might feel. Mrs. Grampus came in and gave Pam a look of semi-disapproval. When I said no hats in school, I should have said no head coverings as well. Pam had a scarf covering her hair. The burned side was just beginning to reappear, and it was beginning to itch. She was about to remove her scarf. "Never mind, I don't much like the sight of your bizarre hairstyle either." Mrs. Grampus began preparing for the day. Kids today are just killing themselves trying to look different. As roll was called, Pam noticed there were several missing today. She ran down the list of boys she'd seen with Ralph last night, and the two matched. Must have been some kind of a wild party. Pam wondered what went on at such shindigs. Fire trucks and bulldozers, racing frogs, and bungee jumping. She popped back into reality just as Mrs. Grampus was saying, "For tomorrow, and don't forget." Pam looked at the girl sitting beside her. "Don't forget what?" she whispered. The girl had a faraway look in her eyes. Pam tried again. "What is it we're not supposed to forget?" She got no reply. The bell interrupted her trying again, and a crowd formed around the teacher's desk, kids coming in from the next class. Pam would have to find out what it was she wasn't going to forget if she could find out what it was first. Great. Time for world history. Was it shaman or shoemen? Just to be on the safe side, Pam had spent half her time studying each subject. Finding Italian shoemen wasn't very easy, but finding Italian shaman was just plain impossible. She'd had to ask Cassandra at home. Cassandra only knew a few. When Pam got to class, she found out it was Italian showmen. And there was a test. Oh, geez. I don't have the faintest idea what to do, Pam mumbled under her breath as she looked at the first question. Name a world-famous Italian circus family, Pam mumbled under her breath. Pam wished it was a multiple guess instead of just a blank space looking back at her. Try the Cristiani family. They're big in Italy. Are you sure? Have I ever lied to you before? Miss Bogus, do you have questions? Miss Goblin was giving her a look. It's just a voice. I thought no questions, ma'am. Pam wrote down Cristiani family in the space. Who invented the idea of the circus? Pam wanted the semi-helpful voice continue but it didn't answer. Well, she tried whispering. Well, what? What's the answer? Pam tried to shout without raising her voice above a sigh. I don't know. What's the question? The voice was being far less than helpful. Number 2. Who invented the idea of the circus? Pam kept a close eye on the teacher as she was discussing the test with her inner voices. Philip Astley, 1768, in England. In ancient Rome, the circus was for horses and chariot racing. Really? Pam did her best to not talk too loud. As she wrote all this down in the tiny space provided, she had to continue along the edge of the test paper. How about number 3? What's the question? Can't you read? Pam was shocked by this idea. I can't look out of your eyes. I only exist inside your head. Pam was really shocked by this last statement. The rest of the test went accordingly. Pam would mumble the question as if taking to herself, which in a way she was, and then the voice would tell her what was hopefully the correct answer. Pam turned in her test paper, feeling about as successful as a parachutist finding out he'd grabbed a backpack. To make matters worse, Pam had finished long before anyone else. Now she sat there waiting to see just how bad she had done. Miss Goblin wasn't helping any by sitting there looking up at Pam as she corrected each question. When at long last Pam got her test back, she thought she must have gotten the wrong one, just like Charlie Brown in that movie. A 1 followed by 2 zeros. That's 100. Did she not only pass the test, she'd aced it. Well, the voice in her head had aced it. This got Pam to wondering where the voices in her head came from, inside herself or somewhere else. If so, where? If not, was she really going crazy like her Aunt Ramona, not Donna? Donna was looking for Bigfoot, and Pam already knew that Bigfoot was real. For tomorrow, so don't forget, Miss Goblin said just before the bell rang. Pam felt lost. Don't forget what? You need to study the history of the Tour de France, drug-using men on bikes. Oh, thanks. Pam headed to her next class. In English class, Mr. Bonnethead was just beginning to call roll as Pam bounded into her seat. There were some missing classmates here as well. For lunch, Pam had a peanut butter and bacon sandwich with a cup of coffee. She found she was missing Eddie's sandwiches, even though they were mostly inedible. Peanut butter and jellyfish? Ugh. She called the office and asked to speak to Cassandra. After going over all the niceties, Pam asked, "Anything new around the office?" She wanted to know if anyone had found out about Hildy and Hilda. Cassandra had other news. Well, Dolores and Hortense had a bit of an accident. Cassandra was trying to sound as if there was nothing to worry about. An accident? What happened? Pam wished she didn't have school to interfere with her job. It was a scrying accident. See, we have a client. He's looking for a missing kid, and they were both trying to find him. The kid, that is. I'd have never thought such a thing was possible. What happened? Are they okay? Pam had jumped to her feet, about to run to her truck, but then remembered she still had a half a day of school to go. They both claimed to be okay. Dolores has a huge bump on her head, and she was kind of knocked unconscious. Hortense has some bruised ribs and a sprained wrist. How? What? Who? When? Pam hoped she sounded far more intelligent than she felt. This morning, they were both gazing into their mirrors. Dolores said she saw something way over in the far corner of her mirror. She tried to get as close as she could. Well, it would seem that Hortense was doing the same thing, only on the other side of the wall, and they ran into each other. Hortense, being so tall, well, she just kind of clobbered Dolores. Through the mirror? Pam didn't think this was possible, but then she had wandered around on the other side of the mirrors for a while. See the Bag Company #1 for answers to questions. They're both doing much better now that the bleeding stopped. Bleeding? Who's bleeding? You didn't say anyone was bleeding. Oh, well, see, it's just that when Dolores got knocked unconscious, she fell and crashed into Eddie, and he hit one of the smaller mirrors with his arm. He's the one with the blood loss. Did he have to go to the hospital? Pam thought the whole company was falling apart without her there to do what? Fall apart with it? Oh, no, he stitched his arm up. He is a medic, after all. Cassandra hoped she didn't have to pass on any more bad news. Oh, any word on the other problem? Pam hoped she was being subtle enough, but not so subtle that Cassandra didn't know what she was being subtle about. No, unfortunately, nobody has any luck with that particular item of business. Uh-oh, I have to get to class. I'll swing by after gym and see how things are going. They did the old friends saying goodbye routine, and then Pam hit end and took off for home ec. I just hope I don't burn the place down today. Then she thought, I hope I don't have to go see Mr. Hammerhead again today. The room was full of smoke, but Pam didn't see any flames anywhere yet. The stove she had been using was the source of most of the smoke. It would appear that whatever Pam had put in to bake was quite finished now. Mrs. Sandtiger was wearing some kind of a breathing device as she opened the oven door and pulled a nicely blackened, smoldering brick from a kiln. It was just too bad that Pam wasn't in the process of making bricks, and this wasn't art class. Miss Sandtiger had pulled on a fire-retardant apron she had begun keeping near at hand any time Pam was in her class. The brick made a solid thunk as it hit the bottom of the sink. Now, see, class, this is why you don't turn the stove on and then go wandering off, seeing what everybody else is doing. She gave Pam a look, and she pulled a plastic face mask from her head, taking some hair with it. The smoke alarm hadn't gone off, seeing as it was no longer connected. Miss Sandtiger had grown tired of the constant alarm every time somebody was cooking something. Steam erupted from the sink as water poured over the toasted brick. "So, Miss Bogus, what were you trying to make today?" Miss Sandtiger put her breathing apparatus back in the closet by the door. The closet door wasn't closed due to all the extra fire extinguishers she had stashed in there. Brownies?" Pam looked in the sink at the black mass slowly cooling. "It looks more like you were making blackies." Miss Sandtiger turned to the class. "All right, who's next?" Pam looked at the warped and shriveled pan. It didn't look anything like the one that she had been using. Mrs. Porbeagle had been writing on the whiteboard for 30 minutes. Pam was trying to copy down everything as it appeared, but half of the time all that she could see was the teacher's back. It helped not one bit she was talking while she wrote. The board was the only one hearing the teacher teach. A quick glance around the room, and Pam saw one guy was sound asleep. The girl next to him was vegged out, staring at the ceiling. It made her feel much better knowing she wasn't the only lost soul in class. "And that's how you come to the conclusion of 42, Miss Porbeagle turned back to the class just as the bell rang. Pam scraped the stuff from her desk into her backpack and headed for the door. The unconscious guy stumbled to his feet and turned to the wall, and his head made a hollow sound as it bounced off the plaster. He turned and staggered to the door. Pam followed him with her eyes. He must have been to Ralph's party last night. She was glad she never went to those kinds of parties, but sad she never got invited either. Pam wasn't looking forward to gym class, but she was glad the day, or at least this portion of it, was drawing to a close. As she was getting changed, she spotted Crystal. Not the close friend, but she did talk once in a while. Crystal had seen better days. "You look like you went to Ralph's party last night," Pam said, just as a way to say hi. Crystal looked at Pam with red-rimmed eyes. "It was good. You should have come by." She was tying her left shoe on her right foot. You might want to switch those around." "Oh, yeah." Crystal turned her shorts around, and now they were on backwards as well. Pam figured she'd best not say anything more for fear the half-dead girl might start removing things. Mrs. Bull had the class out running around the track again. She was installed in the bleachers, a magazine in one hand, Physical Fitness, and a gigundous soda in the other. As Pam ran laps, she kept passing Crystal, who was walking laps, as if nothing much was important. Each time Pam would say a few words of encouragement, which pretty much went unheard. Once Pam had finished a little bitty 5-mile trot, she coasted over to the rail to stretch out a bit and relax. Crystal just kind of gravitated over next to her. "Hey, we're having a get-together tonight. Maybe you want to come?" Crystal looked far worse than Pam after only completing maybe 3 laps. "Where are you getting together?" Pam had zero intention of showing up, but she was curious as to where all the guys were hanging out. This just might be important. I don't know. It's just some place. Ralph knows. Ask him." With that, Crystal wandered away, not in the direction of the school showers. Pam was about to try following. Things were looking just a bit weird around here, but then she heard her name called. "Miss Bogus, I need to see you right now," Miss Bull yelled from her place in the bleachers. Pam hustled over to see what the teacher had to say. "You run pretty good. Ever think of going out for track?" No, ma'am, I don't really have the time. I have a job after school, and it kind of takes most of my day. Pam had never even kind of thought about running as being the thing to do after school. Well, you should consider it. Your school hasn't won a track meet in years, and it's time you stepped up and did something for others. Mrs. Bull had such a way with words. Pam had lost sight of Crystal. I'll ask my mom, see what she says. Pam took off before Mrs. Bull could try getting Paula's number so she could call and entice cooperation from Pam's folks. Pam grabbed her backpack from her locker and ran out to her pickup. She wanted to go see just what all was going wrong at the office. As she got close to her wheels, she was impressed by how shiny it looked today. I don't remember it being so nice looking. Pam got behind the wheel and headed for the office. The yard goat was out front munching on an ear of corn as Pam pulled into the parking lot yard. He yelled, "Hey!" as she got out. Pam tossed him her orange from lunch. He did save the day during that blizzard back in July, and Pam was beginning to think of him more as a pet. Definitely more so than Prince Wapo, who seldom allowed Pam to touch him, let alone pet his fur. Hildy was sitting at her desk. She looked mostly awake, which for her was a huge improvement. The smell of cordite lingered around her. Here, you have a few messages. Hildy held out a stack of notes thicker than Pam's history book. All this in one day? Pam flipped through the stack with one finger. No, that's just the ones I didn't think were jerks that didn't really need to speak to you. Hildy gave Pam a neutral look as if her decisions might be in Pam's best interests. Okay. Pam headed for the coffee shop to visit with whoever was there and enjoy a real cup of coffee. For those of you that don't know, cordite is what's left over when you fire a gun. Eddie had a bandage wrapped around his left arm from elbow to wrist. He slid Pam her usual, as everyone tried to be the first to welcome her back. Some had seen her yesterday, but they either really liked her or they were trying to ingratiate themselves so Pam would assign them the dining room as their office space. They didn't really want the dining room as the dining room. They wanted an office on the first floor that was twice as big as any other room in the house, with the exception of the library coffee shop, which was bigger than most houses. Dolores had a bandage wrapped around her forehead. Her hair was sticking out in all directions, and some of it was dyed bright red from the betadine Eddie had used to clean the wound. As Dolores looked at Pam, one eye rolled around, trying to catch up with its companion. Hortense looked all right, but she had deflected Dolores's head with her shoulder. It hurt, but she was acting tough. Her ribs ached, but she wasn't about to show any weakness, not when others looked far worse. The two were going out of their way to act as if they weren't upset and leery of each other. Eddie had manufactured a sling to hold Hortense's arm and remind her not to use it for a while. Did you guys at least find the missing kid? Pam looked around at all of the other staff gathered around to take a mid-afternoon break. Madame Dingus was there, making nice with Pam, hoping to be the recipient of the before-mentioned office space. The cards said we need to search our hearts in order to find the missing lad. She made this pronouncement as if ending a long debate. I saw a blackness that engulfed the light around it. Hortense had just managed to put eyes on this anomaly when she was clobbered through her mirror. Dolores didn't want to be left out. I saw what looked like a swarm of black insects swirling about at the edge of my vision. I asked Eddie to try shining a flashlight on them. That's when I got punched out by someone. She gave Hortense a look. Hortense opened her mouth, about to strike. Pam spoke before Hortense could unleash her inner beast. So we still don't know where this missing kid might be? She wanted to close this case since it was now going on its second day and had injured 3 staff members. George woke up in the middle of the discourse. I remember a similar case. What was it, 20 years ago? He drifted off, still holding his coffee cup to his lips. All eyes were on him. So what happened? Pam asked in a loud enough voice to wake the old boy. Huh? Oh, we never did find the missing kids. He looked into his cup. That was just after I came to work here. And what about this case reminds you of that other case? Oh, the black swirly thing and the injury to the investigators. George was trying to remember the details. Something about a woman scryer who vanished. Pam looked at the assembled psychics and energy healers and people who pretended to be one of the other. Who was here back when you first came to work? She asked Cassandra, who had been here the longest. When I first came to see about work here, I met your grandfather. It was just a year or 2 before he disappeared. He disappeared trying to exorcise a demon, which led to him, the possessed guy, and most of the mansion across the street vanishing without much of a trace. Oh, there was plenty of mansion trace left, just the lower half, but the 2 people were Kaputsky. There was a guy here named Bruce Wallace. He did horticultural investigations. Let's see, Bobette Merriment was a card reader, though she might have been a fraud. She charged too much and usually disappeared right after a really good reading. Are they still around? Can we get a hold of them somehow? Pam was not too sure, but this sounded important. George perked up. Maybe, I think, he began pulling pieces of paper from his pockets. As he looked at each one, he laid it on the bar next to his coffee cup. When this wasn't productive, he got his wallet out and began searching there. What is that? Pam looked at his money, which was sitting on the bar. Oh, that. It's a $1,000 bill. He handed it to her. I have several at home. I just carry that one in case I need cab fare. Pam looked at some guy named Cleveland, whose picture graced the front of the note. She handed it back, wondering why she'd never seen one before. Here we go. Bobette Merriment. I have her phone number. He looked at the number. She must be something like 85 or 90 by now, if she's still breathing. He looked at Pam. You want me to call her? He handed Pam the note. Hey, why don't I call and see if she's still around? She took the phone number and walked out to the front desk. Just about everybody in the coffee shop followed, wondering about someone who might have come before them. Pam dialed the number and then waited while it rang. After too long, and just before Pam hung up, there was an answer. Yes, who is it? Pam hoped for the best. Is this Bobette Merriment, the psychic? Maybe. Do I owe you any money? No, ma'am. I'm calling from the Bogus Anomalous Group. Oh, yes. I used to work at a place called the Bogus Animals Group, I think. Pam ran through the whole introduction as to who she was and why she was calling. I was wondering if you remember any kind of a disappearance that took place back in the 90s? Jimmy Hoffa. No, wait, that was 75. Let me think. The sound of the phone being set down was followed by what sounded like somebody walking around on a hardwood floor. The sounds of the handset being picked up, dropped, then picked up, came over the phone cord. It was Michael Rockefeller. No, wait, he went missing in the 60s. Did you say the 70s or the 80s? 1990? And they weren't famous, just some kids, and a scryer went missing. Pam tried to smile over the phone. No, that doesn't ring a bell. but I have a map showing where to find Jimmy. Maybe later. Right now we're trying to find out about the kids who vanished. Pam did the pleasantries, telling the woman to live long and, well, she was a bit old to prosper, but to enjoy her time on life, her life on Earth, and then she hung up. She doesn't remember the case. Pam looked at all the staff surrounding her. Do you have the phone number for Bruce Wallace? George began taking all the papers out of his pocket once more. Try the Rolodex. Bruce was a bit more than just a staff member, and he was here all the time, Cassandra said. The sounds of screaming and fear and delight came from the ceiling and passed by inside the wall. It was followed by laughter as a second entity went zipping by. Hortense was the only one who seemed to take notice. What was that? She looked around for an impending attack. House ghosts playing in the laundry chute, Eddie said. Most of the staff had been hearing sounds around the building ever since, even those psychically gifted. Now, Pam had explained about Sharma and Dan. Pam looked at her watch as she reached for the file. It was already 5:30. Most of the staff should have headed home by now. The Rolodex had been a thing of rancor when Pam was the receptionist. Everything was filed under some secret system devised to mislead anybody trying to use it. Susie had beat it into shape, cross-referencing everything and replacing any cards no longer relevant. Pam found a listing for a Wallace, Bruce, followed by phone number. As Pam was dialing the number, some of the staff wandered out the door, heading home to whoever or whatever was there waiting for them. The usual crowd hung around, wanting to see what Pam could find. The phone rang and rang, but nobody was picking up. After way too many rings, Pam hung up. I'll try it again tomorrow, maybe during lunch. She waved a hand at the door to the basement. Eddie looked at the door, but was unable to see the ghosts standing there. They had just come flying down the laundry chute and were on their way back up. George saw a mist drifting up from below, and Barbara got a cold chill as the pair drifted by. Cassandra gave Pam a bit of a push towards the door. Don't you have homework to do? And your mom will want to see you in the house before sundown, once or twice this year. The healer was more concerned about Pam's grades than Pam was. To aid in getting Pam out the door, all the staff began to head out the door. Lieutenant Brambleberry held the door as the staff walked out to the porch and continued on to their vehicles. He bowed to Pam, since she was the only one who could see him. Dear lady, do have a safe trip home. He closed the door, but it swung back open. Chapter 5. Answers, but more questions. Pam needed a break. She'd only been in school for 2.5 days, and she was already waiting for a vacation. Mrs. Goblin had thrown out a pop quiz. Only 10 questions, but it took the entire hour to finish. Pam could have finished in 10 minutes if the voices in her head had stopped arguing and given her the answers in the first place. Mr. Bonnethead just went ahead and gave them a test. Pam knew her English, but her English wasn't what was on the test. What the heck is a participle? It took a while for one of her voices to run somewhere and look it up. Pam was contemplating buying a tablet for them to use, but she wasn't too sure how she would get it into her head. At long last, when the lunch hour had arrived, Pam sat down at the picnic table outside the cafeteria. It was too loud, and the smells coming from the kitchen were unappetizing, to say the least. None of the students liked to eat outside because it wasn't cool, or some such. Pam already had given up on attaining cool and was focusing on eating and getting some fresh air. For lunch, she had a homemade hoagie. A few, if any, students knew or cared that the name Hoagie came from Hoagie Carmichael, a famous composer and actor from the 30s and 40s and maybe the 50s as well. Pam dug her phone out and looked for the number to call Bruce Wallace and see if he was available for a few questions. After a few rings, she heard a voice. "Yes, can I help you?" He sounded very lucid and in control of himself. Pam ran through her introduction and then got down to business. "Do you remember ever hearing about some kids who disappeared back in the 90s? There was a scryer who went missing as well." "Let me think. I remember being asked to look into it. That was some time ago." He made thinking noises. "Cuthbert. Naomi Cuthbert. She was the scryer working on the case originally. If I'm not mistaken, the police had covertly asked for help on the case. They didn't want anybody to know they had hired psychics to look into things, but that was then. How is the public taking your work now?" Some are okay with it, but we still get some odd looks." Pam thought about how the chief of police would wear a mask any time he came for a reading. So what's the deal? You're not just asking for a history lesson, are you?" Mr. Wallace asked. Pam told him how they had a request to find some missing kids and how Dolores and Hortense had bumped heads through the wall. Pam wanted to ask some more questions. She checked her watch and had to hurry up. "Would it be okay for me to meet with you this afternoon?" Mr. Wallace was more than happy to meet Pam at the office after school. Pam ran for her next class. Miss Santiger read off the roll call. There were 10 kids missing today. Pam thought maybe they were just getting sick from breathing all that smoke. She did her best to not set fire to anything today. Pam arrived at the office dressed in her school uniform. She'd taken the time to shower after running a few miles. She wanted to look presentable when she met Mr. Wallace. Her first plan had been to use her office, since she seldom ever got to use it for more than filling out applications for prospective BAG members. Looking at the old desk and the ratty-looking visitor's chair, she opted for the library instead. Besides, she could use a cup of coffee right now. Once word spread there was to be a distinguished visitor from years gone by, just about all the staff found some reason to hang out in the coffee shop. Hildy had been told to send Mr. Wallace in once he arrived. "Bruce Willis is coming here?" She sounded so enthusiastic that Pam felt bad about bursting her bubble. Mr. Bruce Wallace came strolling in, using a cane to keep himself upright. He looked kind of worn out, but still functioning. His suit was immaculate, if not a bit old-fashioned, and showing just a bit of wear. His snap-brimmed hat was held in his left hand. No gentleman ever wore their hat indoors. Everyone tried to be the first one to be introduced. After all the fanfare died down, Pam got down to business. "I really was hoping you might shed a little light on this case we're trying to work. Having 3 of our staff injured kind of makes me nervous." Bruce was sitting at the bar with 4 cups of coffee in front of him. It would appear as if several folks had slipped behind the counter and put together a brew for their guest. He propped his cane against the bar and used his right hand to do everything. His left hand looked a bit worn out. He looked at Pam as if questioning whether she could possibly be in charge of anything short of a sketchy ride at the carnival. Pam felt the side of her head was becoming more itchy as he stared at it. "Let's see, back in the old days, we kind of worked in the shadows. The kids, Maynard and Thalia, went missing while collecting signatures to help end women's suffrage. I'm afraid they weren't the brightest pair in school. They had been driving around town, stopping just about anywhere, in order to inform folks of the evils of suffrage." Bruce had his notebook out for any quick references. "Suffrage, the right to vote in political elections, not to be mistaken for suffering." When the police ran up against a brick wall, they asked for help from a few psychics in and around town. Bruce looked over at George and smiled. They started out trying independent operatives and thinking that the bag was just a bit too public. We did have advertising on the radio at the time. When Miss Cuthbert went missing, the detective in charge came to us. Was her disappearance ever looked into? Pam was trying to act as if she were in charge since, in a way, she was. Looked into, she was sitting in a room full of detectives when she vanished. Bruce tried his coffee, and then he tried the next cup. She was using a bowl of water to do her scrying. No one wanted to say, but I did hear from an officer who was next door at the time. A hand reached up from the bowl of water, grabbed Naomi by the head, and drug her down into the bowl. How big of a bowl of water was she using? This was from Hortense. Oh, it was only 12 inches across. She didn't really fit, but she did get pulled through anyway. At least that's what they say. Bruce thought a second. They said it was a phenomenal mess. How many kids are missing? It started out with just the pair, but by the end of the investigation, there might have been as many as 15 or so. Nobody knows for sure? Pam thought this was just a bit odd. See, the police only listed the kids who were reported missing by their folks, but we here at the Bag Company thought the police were missing a few of the missing. He thought this last statement through. That is, there might be some missing who never had a report filed by the police. Why would their folks not file a report? Pam was used to her folks being concerned with most of her life. Some of these kids weren't exactly the kind their parents wanted back. Bruce had found he liked the idea of a coffee shop in the library. Hortense and Dolores were both feeling a bit exposed. Neither thought being yanked through a mirror sounded very pleasant. And y'all never found out what was going on? Pam wanted answers, not more questions. Things died down. After a few weeks with no more disappearances, other cases came along and took more time. Every so often someone would try looking into the case, but after a year things lost their importance. No one knew what to say, so people discussed other cases from days gone by. Coffee cups were filled and plans made for future investigations. And with that, I'm going to take a break. Hopefully I will record the next show sooner than a week from now. Until next week, this is Chris James for Storytime.
Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man? They say murder 3. Strange things that happen here, no stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.